Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining IRI's September Brown Bag webinar titled Faster, Better Insights with AI with our hosts, Applied Marketing Science. Applied Marketing Science provides market research, consulting, and expert insights for innovation. Founded more than 30 years ago, their roots are in MIT Sloan School of Management. AMS offers a wide range of services to help their clients uncover critical insights. Applied Marketing Science applies traditional and emerging research techniques to aid in the development of innovation products and distinctive customer experiences. They also have trained hundreds of clients in research best practices. Our hosts today are Kristen Corrigan and Carmel Dibner. Kristen is a principal at Applied Marketing Science, where she leads the Insights for Innovation practice, and Carmel is a principal as well at Applied Marketing Science, where she is responsible for client relationships, client service delivery, and business development. If you have any questions during this webinar, please type them into the question box in the GoToWebinar toolbar, and we will field them to our speakers. To get information about upcoming webinars and other IRI events, please visit www.iriweb.org/events. And with that, I will hand over our speakers, Carmel and Kristen.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Kristen Corrigan, and I'm here with my colleague, Carmel. And we're so excited to talk with you today about our groundbreaking AI methodology for qualitative insights for innovation. So today, the first part of the webinar will really focus on walking you through the power of AI and AMS's methodology, how it works, and what it gives you. And then we'll pause for questions and go through 3 distinct customer case studies, one for consumer markets, one for B2B markets, and one for medical markets. And of course, we'll be sure to leave plenty of time at the end for any questions you might have. Okay, let's get started. We know as innovators, it's harder than ever to find truly new and groundbreaking insights. I get this question from my clients all of the time. How can I find the next big aha? On top of that, we're being asked to find these insights more quickly and more cheaply. So research budgets are getting smaller and schedules are shrinking. But we know as researchers and insights professionals that in order to get those rich and game-changing insights, we can't compromise. We do have to dig deep. Well, the good news is that we're going to talk to you today about how you can find game-changing insights without doing traditional primary research. Let's look at the numbers. The truth is your customers are talking and we have to be listening because you may be sitting on a gold mine of insights. Let's look at a few figures here on your screen. 3 billion or more active social media users. I can say myself that I've been on social media this morning. It's staggering and this number is only growing. The average person spends 2 or more hours on social media per day, and that's only growing as well. There's over 100,000 online forums, right? And I always say this to my B2B clients that you'll be surprised. There's forums about everything. If you look at Reddit or even patient forums for medical device research, there's a lot of chatter out there online where customers are sharing their opinions and stories. 60 million have posted reviews online about products and services. This is more popular than ever if you think about the retail sites that you yourself visit. Constantly an influx of reviews on all sorts of products, and this is a rich source for potential insights for innovation. On the other side of things, there are internal sources we can look at as well. So we know that there's 265 billion customer service calls made every year. And in those customer service calls, as you can imagine, customers get very opinionated. I know that we can all relate to this. These customer service calls can be transcribed into text that we can utilize machine learning to find insights. And lastly, the average consumer has 11 customer service interactions per year. So if we can use that text to mine for insights, there's a lot that we could potentially find. But the challenge remains. How do we make sense of all of this data out there, all of what our customers are saying? I'm going to hand things over to Carmel, who's going to walk you through AMS's groundbreaking machine learning technology for game-changing insights for innovation that we've developed in partnership with researchers at MIT. Carmel?
Thanks, Kristen. So the good news is that you can get these insights faster and better with AI. And AI has a lot of advantages. The first is that it's faster due to the processing power. It can process thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of records of data very quickly. We've also heard from our clients that they consider it in some ways to be better because it overcomes human bias. The machine or AI has no hidden agenda, and it doesn't come in with preconceived biases. It's completely objective in what it finds. It's also cheaper, so user-generated content is virtually free. There's usually a very small cost just to scrape the data that's really quite minimal. And beyond that, there are really no outside costs. There's no recruiting cost, there's no incentive cost, or anything of that sort. It's also complete. So one of the reasons this method is so valid is because you're able to mine comments from thousands of individuals to really get a complete picture. When you do traditional research, where you're either surveying or interviewing respondents, there's a limited number of respondents you can get due to time, sample size, and simply feasibility, as well as cost. But here, we can have a very, very large sample. It's also easier, so the machine does the heavy lifting in terms of data reduction and helping us figure out what's really critical here in a massive amount of data. And my favorite reason is that machine learning is relevant. People go online to blog or to submit product reviews or comments at the moment of truth. They have to be moved enough by an experience to want to go online and write about it, whether it's very positive or very negative. And oftentimes, these really polarized experiences are what give you the deepest insights. So as Kristen alluded to, we've partnered with researchers at MIT to build on the latest developments in marketing science. And we helped them to conduct research studies for a paper, which you can see at the bottom of the screen, called Identifying Customer Needs from User-Generated Content. This paper was written by Artem Timoshenko, who at the time was a doctoral dissertation student at MIT, and John Hauser, who's a professor at MIT and a co-founder of our firm. And what we found through these joint experiments with MIT is that insights that we get are comparable both in number and quality to those that we would get with traditional methods. Compared to looking at just a random sample of user-generated content of equal size, the machine yields better insights because it's able to very sophisticatedly identify needs that are hard to find and maybe infrequently mentioned. So you get more and better insights. It also can identify those really important, infrequently mentioned insights that are less likely to be found with traditional methods. If you think about it, just using probabilistic sampling, if you were to take a random sample of the same size, the likelihood that some of those critical insights would be in there and identified is lower than if you were to do machine learning, where it can really mine and identify those key, infrequently mentioned insights in a large set of data. So basically what this does is the algorithm reduces a massive database through the use of what are called convolutional neural networks. Now let's get a little bit deeper into the science. First, you have the raw input, which gets translated into what are called numeric representations that layer onto convolutional layers. Then it pools or groups those layers, and it comes up with what are called word representations. So what we're effectively doing here is we're training word embeddings for semantic meaning, the actual content, and we're identifying the informative sentences using convolutional neural networks. We also have, in this process, select clusters of sentences that represent different customer needs, and the output we get is a sample need from each of the clusters that are identified. If you're interested more in more of the exact science behind the method, we'd also be happy to share this paper with you at the end of the webinar. So in practical terms, what does this mean and how does the process work? So the first step is to identify the sources to mine and to extract the content. Oftentimes companies come to us and they have some sources that maybe they've been informally looking at over time, but they want to mine those sources. But sometimes people come to us and say, you know what, we're not even sure where to find this data. And that's where we can help figure out which sources might be appropriate for machine learning. So once we find the sources, we take out the content that's relevant. We train the algorithm to differentiate between informative and uninformative content. Informative content contains a customer need or otherwise a key insight, whereas uninformative content does not. And this training, we are often asked, is it an objective training or a subjective training? It is highly objective. So any of us who would train the machine would come up with the same result, because really we're just differentiating between informative and uninformative. We're not at this stage making any value judgment on the content or its quality. Then we run the machine, which usually is quite fast. It can take under 30 minutes. We get the output, which is usually in the format of about 2,000 or so sentences, that the machine says if you only read these 2,000 sentences, you would understand the vast majority of everything that exists in the complete database of needs. So it's a very effective data reduction tool. And then on the back end, we do the human analysis of taking those verbatims and translating them into customer needs or insight. And what I love about this process is that the human piece, where we provide our insights, is at the beginning, step 1 and 2, and at the end, step 5. We do what humans do best, which is figure out what data we should even be looking at and analyzing it on the back end. And the machine does what machines do best, those steps in the middle, 3 and 4, where it's reducing the data for us in a way that humans could not possibly process. So it leverages the best of what machines do and the best of what humans can do. We've had dozens of successful client applications since we began using this method in 2017. And clients have used this method for a variety of purposes, including uncovering the universe of customer needs for innovation, identifying adjacent categories. For example, let's say you're a manufacturer of a skincare product, and you want to not just look at your skincare product, but all the other kinds of products people might put on their bodies or on their skin. We can explore those adjacencies in one project. We can also discover insights about competitors. We can track market trends, and we can also even use this to develop effective claims by looking at what kind of language are people using to talk about certain products, and what key attributes do they care about. Those can provide great insights when you're thinking about what claims you want to make around your brand or your products. So the question we get asked frequently is, well, what do I need to make this work? What's enough data? The good news is that the threshold of data can be quite small. So you really only need at least 2,000 sentences. We've done this with over 500,000 sentences, but for it to work, you really just need about 2,000 or so good sentences, informative sentences. You need substantive submissions that are at least 7 words per entry. So saying the product was great, not very informative or substantive, but if there's actually 7 or more words, we consider it to have some content that can be analyzed. It needs to be text-based data, no pictures, charts, or other graphics. However, as Kristen mentioned, if you do have audio files, we can convert that to text. So audio is in no way a barrier to this process. And it needs to be rich, informative content. Well, how do we know if it's rich, informative content? We can quickly read through and just make sure that there's a good amount of attributes, needs, problems, opinions, and solutions represented in the data set by looking at a sample. So we like to divide the types of sources into two different buckets. There are the sources that are related to user-generated content, meaning content that already exists online and is widely available, such as product reviews, forums, blogs, etc. And then the other bucket is proprietary data. This is data that your company may have related to your specific products or services. For example, the call center data, logs, online chat data, open-ended survey data, or even other kinds of sources you may have. Additionally, we've extended this method to also look at sentiment, so we can map and compare performance across brands, products, SKUs, and understand not only what people are saying, but what's the sentiment behind it. Where are they unhappy, and where can your company or others do better? And similarly, where are they delighted, or where might you be over-meeting their needs? We can also look at frequency of mention, which could be used as a proxy for importance, but also tells us how top of mind something is at the moment of truth. So now I'm going to pause here before we get into our case studies, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have at this point.
Ladies, there were a couple of questions that popped up. The first one we see is, how do you identify the right sources to use?
Okay. How do we identify the right sources? That's a good question, and I'll start and Carmel will chime in. I think, you know, as Carmel mentioned, oftentimes there are sources that our clients know have rich information. So take your social media sites like Facebook or Instagram, where folks may be talking about a particular product or service. Other products, say consumer products, we're going to talk about blenders next. Reviews are really good sources of information. And then particularly in business-to-business categories where there may be less chatter online, we look to internal sources that our clients have to mine this type of text data. So that could be call center data. It could be issue or usage tickets. It could be NPS survey open ends, wherever there's textual data. And we're happy to explore new sources also that we haven't used before. So we're frequently asked to try new things. For example, I was recently asked, could we do this with article abstracts to see what topic areas have been covered? That's also a really interesting source. We often find that combining a variety of sources, each source yields slightly different insights. So there's some that are tried and true that we can identify, but there are others that we might just want to try out for the first time and see how they go and see if they help us complete the picture of insights. Yeah, and that's the great thing about the machine, because the machine can handle such a volume. You can put all of those different sources in together. And you can also compare the type of insights and sentiment of those insights by sources, right? So clients often ask us to create a Venn diagram of sorts so they can understand, for example, the types of insights and sentiment they're getting from their NPS survey versus the type of insights and sentiment they're getting from social or from reviews. Both are useful, and knowing where the insights are coming from can help inform strategy.
Ladies, there's some real good questions. This is from a Mr. Preeti Chandra. How do you ensure objectivity in reducing data to informative content?
Sure, I can address this one. So when we're reducing informative to uninformative, we are not really in any way making a judgment about whether or not something is a new insight. What we're judging is just whether or not there is enough content that it makes sense for the machine to analyze it. So for example, if someone just says, this product did a great job, or I received it in the mail, that's not really helpful in terms of developing insights. But if they say, I received this product on time, and when I opened the box, it was very intuitive to use it for the first time, the instructions were clear, et cetera, now that becomes informative because they're providing us with sufficient content for the machine to analyze. So we can be objective in that we're really just saying, is there content here that can be analyzed by the machine and is sufficiently detailed versus not enough detail to be useful.
Okay, I've got one more question from Rajesh. Is non-text data important? Why or why not? And do you have plans to address visual data?
Yes, that's a great question. So is non-text data important? Certainly is. This particular method that we're talking about today just directly deals with text data. So that's what we're tackling with this particular application of AI. But we agree that exploring visual is very important. And I know Carmel is working with some researchers over at MIT on expanding our capabilities about using AI for visual input, and happy to talk with you about the webinar more about that if you're interested in exploring it.
Okay, do you have time for more questions?
I think we can take one more and then move on to the case studies, and then we'll be sure to reserve time at the end to get to the rest.
Okay, there's one more question. It's how do I know whether machine learning or traditional market research is better for a particular application?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they each have their advantages. Like any method, there are pros and cons. Machine learning is great when you know that you have sources of untapped data and you know that there's chatter either online or information that you've collected. Traditional research can be really effective if you're looking to get answers from a very targeted group and you want to understand responses by group. So with machine learning, we don't necessarily know who is saying what, which in terms of gathering customer needs is fine, because at this point we're just trying to gather the list of customer needs. Later we can have we can do a survey or use other methods and find out, you know, who agrees with what. But when we're just trying to develop a list, we don't need to know who's talking. However, there are cases where you want feedback from very specific respondent groups, and you can't identify who's talking online or who's in those groups. That's when you might want to turn to traditional research, where you control the data input a little bit more. Also, there are certain categories where there just isn't enough online content or available content, or where something's so new to the market that there might not be content yet, or where your research questions are so specific that we can't find the answers in data that exists. Otherwise, I'd say machine learning is very widely applicable anytime there is existing data, and it does save a lot of time and cost compared to traditional recruiting or traditional methods. I do want to add, though, that we've often had success with a hybrid approach where applicable. So there are times where you want to broadly explore a category, but you also want to get answers to very specific questions. There, what we do is we start with a machine to get a broad survey of what's out there and what we can gather. And then the second part of the study, we'll do traditional research to answer the questions that we're not able to answer with machine learning. And one reason I like this approach is that it's highly efficient and makes the best use of your budget. Because then when you go to traditional interviews and you have people on the line, you can really just focus exclusively on the questions that are unanswered. And it's much more efficient than trying to tackle everything when, you know, 50 to 80% of the answers you could just find through machine learning, and you don't kind of need that live person that you have to incentivize.
Exactly. And I'll add to that too, that sometimes I pair this machine learning methodology with ethnographic or observational research, because while the machine is very good at uncovering functional and experiential and emotional needs, frankly, those latent needs are more difficult. And so we run the machine, we understand the functional needs, and then we go out into the field and observe to understand those unspoken needs, as well as the hacks or workarounds that customers may be employing using our product. Okay, so with that, let us move to our case studies, and we'll take more questions at the end. Don't worry, if yours didn't get answered, I'm sorry. Our first case study details how we used machine learning for a consumer product, blenders. And you may be thinking, why did we pick blenders for this case study? It's a really good example because there are many needs related to blenders. There are functional needs around how the blender operates, how well it chops food. There are more emotional or deeper level needs about what appliances in our home say about us and our family and our status and things like that. There are needs related to health if folks are buying a blender for a new diet or a new fitness regimen. So there's really a lot of depth here. In this particular example, we employed this research as part of the paper we authored or supported MIT on. And the question that we had was, can we come up with a complete set of customer needs and insights related to blenders to inform product development and marketing, similar to what we would collect in a traditional research study? So can we do it by only using product reviews? And so as part of this experiment, we used the machine on product reviews, and we also analyzed a random sample of reviews, as Carmel said before. And so just to clarify what that means is, we would go to various websites, Target, Walmart, for example, and take a random selection of reviews and compile customer needs based on that random selection. And then we used the machine and compared the results from that. And I'll talk about that more in just a minute. So the process that we followed for this case study, we identified the sources to mind and we extracted the content, or in other words, took it off of the websites so the machine could read it. And so for this, I believe we used retail sites like Target and Walmart and took the reviews directly from the product reviews, the text. We trained the algorithm to tell the algorithm what was informative or not informative. We ran the machine, we outputted the data, and we did our analysis as human analysts. So we started with 18,000 sentences and 97 unique insights emerged. And this was a huge win for us when we did this study, because we said, wow, this exactly mirrors what we would typically see in a voice of the customer study for a product like blenders. We usually see anywhere between 80 and 120 unique insights, and here we have 97. This is fantastic. We identified insights around 34 topic areas, so really robust, really comprehensive. You'll see the varying categories here range from footprint to portability to odor to setup to power, malfunctioning, waste, and decor. So really spans the gamut in terms of how people are talking about blenders. I want to share with you 3 of the 97 insights we identified as part of this. And I'll focus in on the one on the right here, the topic being blending quality. So the informative content that we extracted from the reviews, this is the customer verbatim. This unit has no problem with the fruit or the almonds, but will struggle with the flax seeds. Okay, so very specific consumer verbatim. The insight that we as AMS gleaned from this was able to blend anything I put in it, regardless of the texture, e.g. fruit, nuts, seeds, etc. So you'll see how the process flows from a topic area to the informative content to the insight that we as analysts develop. And so again, these are just 3 of the 97 insights we identified. Carmel mentioned before that this methodology is really good at identifying overlooked insights. So those areas where customers are infrequently mentioning things, but they may be important areas to look for disruptive innovation, because we know that frequency of mention while useful does not always equate to importance, and some of these emerging needs may be important areas to look at. So let's go through a few of these. Assured I never have to worry about the tightness of the blade on my blender. Very nuanced insight there. Assured my blender won't ruin the surface it's sitting on. In other words, it won't ruin my table. My blender stays put when I'm using it, doesn't wobble or walk across the counter, and then easy to turn the blender on and off. In other words, the switch doesn't get stuck or become hard to push. And I'll also add here that when we did the experiment of taking the random sample reviews versus the machine learning sample, these were specific insights, right, Carmel, that the machine identified that the random sample did not. So really powerful stuff here that the machine is really able to get those detailed level needle in a haystack needs that may be potential differentiators for our product moving forward. The last item I'll talk about here is the idea of overlaying sentiment. And this is really exciting, and it's something that our clients have really loved in terms of adding an additional dimension to their data. So what we can do is we can run sentiment analysis on the volume of customer verbatims, and it enables us to pair the needs that machine learning identified with the way that consumers are talking about them, right? So in this example, you'll see that we're looking at the sentiment of Ninja versus Hamilton Beach. And Ninja is really winning out on aesthetics, blades, and blending quality, where Hamilton Beach is being talked about more positively and related to cleanliness and durability. So as brands and as products, this just gives us an additional layer to inform where we might innovate or where we might focus on positioning ourselves relative to the competition. And with that, I'll hand things over to Carmel to walk you through our B2B example.
Thanks, Kristen. So a lot of companies have said to us, this seems very doable for consumer brands, but what about us who work in B2B categories? There's often, or so we think, not enough data. Well, sometimes there actually is. So this client came to us wanting to look at snow plows and snow spreaders to find customer needs and insights related to those products to inform both the product development and marketing efforts. And at first glance, you think there probably isn't a lot of information on these topics online. But actually, when people who snowplow come home at the early hours of the morning after being up all night, they go online and they blog with each other and they go on forums to try to find out what can they do to be more efficient and do their job better and quicker in the middle of the night. So those are really rich, specific sources. So this is the same slide you saw before. Here we had 21,000 sentences that we were able to get on the topic. And we came up with 117 unique insights, which really is quite staggering for a topic like snow removal. You'd think, the ability to remove snow would be the primary need, but there are a lot of sub-needs that come into play here. So here are 3 of the 117 insights identified, and I'm just going to talk about one of them here, the spreader. So as you can see, there's a quote, and this is usually how we present it. We have the exact verbatim quote that came out of the machine. The top box keeps my tools safe and dry. Do they still have plastic wheels? Good spreaders, but wheels keep cracking. And so the insight, the human piece that we do is we translate that verbatim into a need. So assure the wheels on my spreader are durable, i.e. will not crack. And what I like about this method in particular is that everything we get from the machine is traceable. So if someone says to us, where did that need come from? Rather than saying, well, maybe we heard it in an interview or we read about it, here we can say exactly, here is the paragraph, here's the sentence this came from, which in management presentations really gives some great color to the findings. And our client had said, and they've been in the industry for a long time, that they found some game-changing new insights for this industry. So my favorite insight here is that when they angle the snow plows, let's say they're going into a driveway, They want to be really careful that they're not plowing on the grass and ripping up somebody's lawn. But it's precisely at the moment where they have to angle the plow and be really careful that the plow is blocking the headlights as it's angled. And so the insight here is able to maintain full visibility at all times, even while my plow is angled, will not block the headlights. And it's at that exact moment where they need the best visibility that visibility is compromised. So this was a really great insight for our client and can be game-changing. And you can see here there are 3 others as well. So even someone very experienced in their field heard new things that they typically don't hear, either because someone doesn't think to mention them or we don't think to ask those questions. And this is directly from our client in terms of what he said on this project that really struck him about the method. So he said that they got a, quote, a mix of known and new results. And what I think he means by this is that known results increase, and he said this to me, they increase his confidence in the validity of the process. You don't only want to hear things you've never heard before, because that means the machine isn't doing a good job of really understanding the category in its totality. So he heard things he heard before, which is reassuring that the machine is working. But he also had unknown results, things he had never heard before, and that increased the value, his confidence in the value of this process. He also said it was very cost and time effective for him, and the cost was reasonable, very reasonable compared to the traditional research methods he had used. He was also struck by how fast we could carry out this process, and that the results were objective. So going back to the beginning of the presentation, there's no human bias, there's no agenda of anyone when the machine works. It's really giving us unbiased output. And every time we do the machine, it gets smarter and smarter and better. And we can tell you more about that as well. So really happy with the objectivity of the results and the fact that the machine is just a really smart algorithm. And now I'll turn it over to Kristen to do our final case study, which is in the field of medical devices.
Yes, we could not leave medical devices out of the mix. And so for this particular study, what we were after was identifying customer needs and insights related to glucose monitors. And this was to inform product development and marketing. So we know that 1.5 million Americans are diagnosed with diabetes every year. It's the 7th leading cause of death. We also know that the market is rapidly changing for blood glucose testing equipment. There's been an introduction of continuous glucose monitoring devices. So, a company looking to introduce a new testing device really faces stiff competition. So in terms of innovating, there's really a need to understand what customers are talking about, where their unmet needs exist, and what's really out there in terms of customer sentiment. So that's what we did with our machine learning methodology. So to understand diabetic patients, we mined forums and blog posts. We looked at e-commerce sites for various product reviews for these glucose monitors. And we also looked at social media. So we were able to get a lot of textual data from patients living with diabetes. So this need should look familiar by now. Here's some example of the customer articulations and then the needs that we formulated from those articulations. I'll talk about the one in the middle here that relates to connectivity. So the verbatim reads, "The only way to compile a report is to email it to yourself. You can't print it directly from the app. Now that the phrase online privacy is basically an oxymoron, I'm not thrilled about my test results being stored remotely or being required to email my results rather than printing them locally." So there's a need here to be able to store readings in a way that is private and secure. In other words, not transmitted. So that's an example of a very rich customer verbatim or patient verbatim that we transformed into a need about connectivity. Now for this particular initiative, we took things a step further than the qualitative machine learning insights gathering. What we did is we took this to quantitative research to help us prioritize our needs in terms of innovation and product development. So what we did is we crafted a survey with two main elements. The first asked patients what was important to them for their glucose monitor, and we used the needs that came from machine learning for ratings. And then we asked consumers or patients what they felt the performance of those needs were in reference to their own glucose monitors or any other brands that they might be familiar with. So we're collecting importance and performance of these critical needs to understand where we should innovate. We talked to nearly 300 patients that were over 18. They had type 1 or type 2 diabetes. They must have owned or used a glucose monitor in the last 3 months, and they must use it at least once a week, and they used a variety of brands. And the key output of this quantitative research is this matrix, and it's very powerful in terms of using customer needs to innovate. So you'll see on the y-axis we have importance from high to low, and on the x we have performance from low to high. And in the upper right, there's a quadrant called minimum requirements. These are needs that are high in importance and high in current performance. We call these minimum requirements because customers are telling us these needs are very important, but the market is already doing a good job at serving them. And so we as product developers, innovators, manufacturers merely need to maintain these areas. The upper left quadrant is interesting, and we call this a focus area because customers are telling us that these needs are very important, but the market is not doing a good job of satisfying those needs. This would be a good area to look for and investigate for potential competitive advantage or innovation. In the bottom right, we see needs that are overemphasized or high in current performance, but not all that important. This is where we might look to mine resources for other areas of investment. And the last quadrant in green there we call hidden opportunities. These are needs that customers are telling us are not that important to them, and no one's really doing a good job of meeting them. And we oftentimes advise clients to look for hidden innovations or disruptive innovations here because we know that sometimes customers will give the market or give companies a pass if they don't believe that something can be done or they've never experienced it. If a technological solution emerges that can meet that need, there's a potential for needs that fall in the hidden opportunities quadrant to eventually become focus areas or minimum requirements as the technology emerges. So let's look at how the data fell out for our glucose monitor example. Now this is a lot of data here, so bear with me, I'm going to walk you through it. You'll see a number of colored dots and text arrayed on the matrix here. The needs range across several primary categories related to accuracy and durability, compatibility, connectivity, customer service, interface and features, mobility and portability, purchase instructions, and usage. So you'll see that in the upper right minimum requirements, it's not all that surprising that the needs related to usage as well as portability and accuracy are all expected. So patients want to make sure their readings are reliable, that the monitor comes with the accessories needed to operate, know that the monitor has accepted their sample, and that the interface is easy to read. So really all of the basic things that the product must do. If we look at the focus areas though, several interesting findings sort of pop out here. Really interesting that a need related to not wasting test strips come over here. And this was something that was particularly surprising to our client. It's something that came out as an area that the market really wasn't performing well on, but consumers and patients were saying that they felt that they were wasting these items. The other area to note here is not feeling the puncture from the lancet. And as a manufacturer, you may look at a need like this and say, well, the patient has to puncture themselves with a needle. How can we make that not hurt? Well, I don't know specifically how this might be achieved, but it's certainly something that patients mentioned frequently and said, nobody else is really addressing this. And then the other piece is just having a manufacturer that stands behind all of their products for the life of the ownership. And then a few in the hidden opportunities just to reference before we get to questions. Looking at syncing the technology with phones and computers, assured my stored readings are private and secure, syncs with my smartphone. So all of these technology, data security related needs we see falling in the lower left here, which tells us, in terms of hidden opportunities for innovation, these are certainly areas we want to explore and potentially watch, such that if we can get our app and our services improved, these may be areas for competitive advantage. So I hope this case study illustrated how we can take the machine learning methodology even a step further to overlay quantitative insights. The last piece here is just looking at sentiment analysis versus satisfaction. Now, anyone that's done survey research with satisfaction ratings can tell you that it's very hard for consumers or patients to differentiate between brands when they're taking a survey. It just is, and we do a lot of survey research here. When we compare the stated performance versus the sentiment from the machine learning, it's powerful because you'll see here that Bayer actually has the highest sentiment in the unstructured data that we got for machine learning, whereas Freestyle Abbott has the lowest sentiment. But Freestyle Abbott, on the other hand, when you look at performance from a survey, has the highest performance rating. So I'd say it's powerful to look at both, and that sentiment really adds that other element so you can understand, given the data that are out there online, how are customers talking related to how they would think in a survey. So with that, I think we have about 10 minutes left to take any additional questions that you may have.
Actually, we have a couple of questions. One was, do you have more success using proprietary data or publicly available data?
I'd say that we've had success with both types of data, publicly available and proprietary.
It also depends on the industry that you're in. So there are certain industries, particularly consumer industries, where there's a lot of online content, and there you may have a lot of success with publicly available data, coupled with maybe call center feedback and data, which would be an internal proprietary data source as well. But in some of the B2B categories, there just isn't publicly available data, and that's where we can really mine your own internal data, whether it's survey open ends with your customers or other ways that you solicit feedback. So where there isn't publicly available data, we're happy to kind of work with you and explore what might be available to analyze internally that you already have that might just not be fully tapped yet.
Yeah, so related to that, you see our slide up here now. I think the first step of any engagement, if you're thinking about this as something that might work for your organization, is to schedule a call with either me or Carmel, and we would talk about the potential sources, right? And as we said before, oftentimes you have some sources in mind in terms of where you want us to look. And then we can also seek out sources ourselves, and they could be a combination, but that's really something that we dive into even before we start an engagement to make sure that the sources we're selecting are going to have data to answer your research questions and that there is enough data to run a machine.
Okay, I've got some great questions here. Stuart Melman asks, are the sentiment differences statistically significant?
I think, in terms of the sentiment analysis, I'm happy to talk further about how it works with you offline, but understand that we are using the entire database of text to understand sentiment. So it's not just the 2,000 or so phrases outputted by the machine. It's actually the entire database. And so to that extent, yes, because we were able to get a sentiment score for every line of text where there is positive, negative, or neutral sentiment. We also track irony and sarcasm as well.
Okay, and I've got one additional question for the presenters. How do you access social media data or forums? Unlike reviews, it's usually not scrapable under usage terms.
That's a great question, and we are constantly monitoring the usage terms of certain sites because, as you know, different sites have different rules and regulations in terms of how you can treat and use their data. And that has implications on our end too in terms of what we can keep internally and what we can share with you, the client, right? So we're very careful about that. I will say that in regards to social media specifically, we have many companies that have social media listening tools where they're regularly extracting content from sources like Facebook and Instagram. And they will just share the Excel files with us with that commentary, or Yelp, for example. I guess that's a review site. But companies are tracking this and extracting this all the time. And we either take internal sources or we follow the guidelines based on the rules of the site to make sure we are complying with all consumer privacy regulations.
One last quick question, and then we want to make sure that everybody knows that they can follow up with the presenters after the webinar. I believe they're putting up a slide with contact information. And one last question, there it is. One person was intrigued and said, however, given that it's a new method, any advice for getting leadership to buy into the process?
Sure. So this is a great question and a question I get all the time. People really want to try something new, but they're also hesitant to be the one to bring something new to the table because what if it doesn't work, or what if people aren't bought into the method? I would say involve people early in understanding the method and really going through with them. How have we proved that this method works, and how have we proved the validity of it up front? I would say those initial conversations are really important, more than other methods. Having that call at the start of the project and piloting it becomes really important here. And on the back end, I think having us present to your team, so sometimes with research, we'll present to the research buyer, and then they will present to their internal team. That can work well for methods that are known. For methods that are unknown, we found that clients have a much better time if we're sort of in those meetings with them, and we can show them how the machine worked. We can even take them through some of the databases and how we sort of culled the data on the back end. And that seems to be very useful. I can say the number one question I get from senior leadership at the end of a project is not about the validity of it, but how do we scale this and do more and more of it? Because with each application, this becomes less expensive to do. And as I mentioned before, the machine gets smarter. So, in conclusion there, I would say get buy-in up front, but also don't be hesitant to have the people behind the methodology in the top management meetings, because we can really show the validity of the method and share the details of the approach. Lastly, the fact that everything is traceable and mappable with this method really further increases its validity, because you can really trace where every single insight and comment came from.
Yeah, that's right, Carmel. So just to wrap things up, thank you everyone for joining us today on this Friday. If you want to talk with us more, you have questions, or you're interested in piloting this in your organization, we would love to talk to you. We're very passionate about insights for innovation. We're very passionate about this new technology and how it can replace or even complement traditional methods. So feel free to reach out, and I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend.
Okay, I wanted to thank Kristen and Carmel from Applied Marketing Science, and greatly appreciate your time. I think it was a great webinar. All the attendees will get a follow-up email from IRI, and there'll be a link to the IRI website's Learning Center, where you'll have access to this webinar. And again, feel free to contact Kristen and Carmel with any of your questions that you may still have. And we want to thank everybody and enjoy your weekend.